Welcome, everyone, to this morning's state-of-the-art lecture. My name is Alan Gunderson. I'm an acting Associate Deputy Commissioner of the Competition Bureau, and it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker, Dr. Marcel Boyer. So Marcel is currently an Emeritus Professor of Economics at the Université of Montréal, an Associate Member of the Toulouse School of Economics. He's held both the Bell Canada Chair in Industrial Economics at the University of Montreal and the Jaroslawski Chair in Technology and International Competition at the École Polytechnique de Montréal. Dr. Boyer has received many prizes and honors, so just to name a few for today's audience, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada in 1992. In 2013, he became an Honorary Fellow of the Canadian Economics Association. He received the Prix Léon Giron for Career Excellence in Humanities and Social Sciences in 2015. And in December of that year, he was made an Officer of the Order of Canada. So Professor Boyer is a former President of the Canadian Economics Association and a member of the Board of Directors of the National Bureau of Economic Research. Professor Boyer has published many papers and co-authored many publications. So there are two that I want to mention, recent publications of his that have received distinction. The first is an article in Concurrence titled "The Determination of Optimal Fines in Cartel Cases, Theory and Practice." This article was chosen as Best Academic Economics Article in 2012 by the Institute of Competition Law and George Washington University Law School Antitrust Writing Awards. A second article titled "Alleviating Coordination Problems and Regulatory Constraints Through Financial Risk Management," published in the Quarterly Journal of Finance, received the Midwest Finance Association's Outstanding Paper Award in 2015. So the title of Professor Boyer's presentation this morning is "Challenges and Pitfalls in Competition Policy Implementation." Let's welcome Professor Boyer.
Thank you very much, Alan. I'm very pleased to be here today, and I would like to thank the organizers of the conference for giving me the opportunity to address this winter meeting of the Canadian Economic Association. That's a joke, because it's a tough act to follow the lectures we had in the last few days, in particular Nancy Wheeler, Nancy Galini, and Tom Lemieux yesterday. But I'll try to do my best to live to the standards. Let's start with what I say. There are three perspectives on competition policy. Oh, I should say that I'm going to present kind of a poorly integrated talk. I mean, I'm going to address different issues in competition policy, and some of them may not be very well related to each other. So I'm not presenting a paper, I'm presenting different perspectives on competition policy. The first one is a legal perspective, and that's what the antitrust authority is doing. But the antitrust authorities are also involved in economics. And there is also, and I'm going to address that in the latter part, competition in public policy. Okay? Not so much competition policy, but competition in public policy. And I'm going to address competition in education, healthcare, and so on. And I'm going to present some data that will be some information value to you. It's a complex, multifaceted framework, competition policy, and I'm going, of course, to address just specific aspects, and it's impossible for me to do. But as a tribute to Saint-FX, I was wondering what that word was all about when I heard it the first time, Saint-FX. And as a tribute for this very well organized and warm welcome of to this conference, yesterday we were told that Harry Johnson was a former professor, started his career basically here at Saint-FX. So I thought that I would start by paraphrasing Harry G. Johnson, himself paraphrasing the great tragedian Euripides, although the source is not as clear as one would like, but at least that's what the story tells us. So what Harry Johnson, and I'm paraphrasing Johnson, he said, whom the gods would destroy, they first endow with central bankers, antitrust competition authorities, national statisticians, and academic economists. And to ensure that destruction is complete, they encourage them to meet in national and international forums and conferences and coordinate their errors. So Harry Johnson was talking about central bankers, so in the originals, but I thought it was a good tribute again to Saint FX, relating this to Harry Johnson. Let me start with the Competition Bureau, the annual plan, which just came out a few weeks ago. And the title of that is Competition is Key. And I'm going to use that, to refer to that phrase, competition is key. And it's written that by driving companies, and I will add organizations, not only companies, but organizations in a more general term, to work more efficiently, deliver high value while keeping costs down, and continuously improve their products and services, competition benefits consumers and businesses alike. And this is a statement that I'm going to refer to later on in my talk. So I'm going to address 5 sets of challenges and pitfalls. The first one is the problem of discovery and finding of cartels. I'm going to talk about anti-competitive markers. When can we say, if we observe a phenomenon, can we say that, oh, there must be a cartel behind that phenomenon rather than a competitive process? When can we distinguish between the two? It's not an easy matter, and we'll see, what those markers are. Then I'm going to say a few words about immunity and leniency programs. Most of the cases, cartel cases today, are prosecuted following an immunity application and leniency application by cartelists, and therefore would like to look at those. Pitfalls and cartel finding. What are the issues in terms of, I'm going to say a few words about law versus economics of cartels. I'm going to talk about overcharges, dynamics, and mixed strategy framework in assessing cartel finds. Then I'm going to talk about collaboration. Collaboration is good, and I'm going to say a few words about the Austrian model of pre-1995 regarding cartel policy. In Austria, in Finland, Sweden, Norway, cartels were the rule of the land in the early 1990s. In fact, governments favored cartels, okay? And we'll see how this has, what that meant. And then I'll say a few words about the guidelines for cooperation between competitors that the Canadian Bureau has issued. The third point would be convincing people that competition is good. It's a difficult stance to try to convince people that competition is good for everybody. People tend to be afraid of competition, and therefore education by antitrust authorities, protection against risk, I'm going to say a few words about that. And then I'll move to competition in public policy, competition in the public sector, education, healthcare, I'll say a few words about that. And then I'll conclude with the fifth, the pro-efficiency and pro-competition policies. So a few words about avoidable costs and full cost sharing as in the predatory practices of firms. And then I'll talk a little bit about public grants, loans, financial guarantees, how they affect competition. So let's talk about the discovery and finding of cartels. And that's going to be the econometric part of my talk. I promised that I would cover that in the first part of my talk. So anti-competitive markers, and here I'm quoting almost Harrington 2008, 7 markers, a higher list price and reduced variation in prices across customers. So a series of steady price increases preceded by steep price declines would be a marker for that a cartel is active. Okay. Price increases is one area without a corresponding increase in imports from other areas. So kind of a practice of market sharing in a sense. Firms' prices are strongly correlated. A high degree of uniformity across firms in product price and other dimensions, including the prices of ancillary services. Low price variance, particularly when there is variance in the cost of key inputs. And prices subject to regime switches. The problem, and that's what I call challenges of EC marker, anti-competitive markers, is that most of those markers are also compatible with competition. Think of the fourth one, that prices are strongly correlated. Well, in a perfectly competitive market, everybody sells at the same price. There's one price given to everyone. And the price will go up and down, but everybody is facing the same price and selling at the same price, in a sense. But a highly competitive context will also have highly correlated prices. So it's, I remember one day I was on a round table at the Faculty of Law at the Université of Montréal with lawyers claiming that, it's clear that, this industry is under cartel, as form of cartel, because all the prices are moving up and down at the same time. And then I tried to convince the audience of lawyers that, in fact, in the competitive market, prices will go up and down at the same time, or almost at the same time. So what I'm going to present now is a specific case of a marker, I think, which is much more indicative of a collusion, is the retail gasoline cartel in Quebec. And the marker I'm going to talk about is the reduction in the standard deviation of prices between retailers and the variance of this standard deviation. So basically, in a competitive market, the tâtonnement process, the Walras tâtonnement process, that prices are always different between sellers. But not much, but everybody is trying to find the proper price. And since conditions are changing every day, possibly, in particular in the gasoline market, someone is going to raise the price by 1/3 of a cent per liter, and then it's going to be followed in the next few hours, and then someone's going to reduce the price from the new equilibrium, because by the end of the day, demand is not there. They're going to reduce it by 1/2 cent and so on. But it takes time before everybody kind of find the light, in a sense, that what is the demand? And if you take a photo of prices at a given time, you get a standard deviation. And prices are different between the different retailers in the gasoline market in the given city. Okay, and this retail, and that's what I'm going to show you some data on that. Let me say a few words about this retail gasoline cartel. So we have 4 cities in Quebec where there was an alleged cartel going on: Sherbrooke, Victoriaville, Thetford Mines, and Magog. And the way that the cartel developed is that some people had stations in 2 different cities, and therefore once the cartel was kind of organized in one city, then it could organize it also in the other city, and so on and so on. I'm going to show you something about Sherbrooke. 95% or 90% of the retailers were members of the cartel. So they would call each other, there would be a chain of phone calls, and the Competition Bureau, following some complaints by marginal players who were not members of the cartel, eventually went to do some study of the market. They went to visit the town. They went around and they asked one of the retailer. I'm not giving any kind of very confidential. This is all stories. Ask a retailer. It's curious. All prices are the same. Across town. And the guy says yes, because yesterday night we called each other and we fixed it this morning at 9 at $1 a liter, let's say. And then the guy from the Competition Bureau says, don't you know that this is illegal to fix prices like that? Look, the answer came very quickly. Look, it's already very tough to earn a decent living. If we have to compete against each other now, I mean, that's really, so when I was saying that it's difficult to convince people that competition is good, that person just said, yes, we fix prices. Not only we fix it, but that's the way we can survive, because otherwise we won't be, so to date, this cartel, 39 individuals and 15 companies have been charged for their role in the gasoline price fixing conspiracy in 4 local markets in Quebec. To date, 33 individuals and 8 companies have pleaded or were found guilty with fines totaling $4 million. These are small operators. I mean, it's not... of the 33 individuals who have pleaded or were found guilty, 6 have been sentenced to conditional sentences of imprisonment totaling 54 months. Conditional sentences, this is an expression which means that they're not going to jail, they're going to serve their jail term in the community. It's called conditional sentences. And several trials are still ongoing before the court, so there are still trials going on. Now, the Competition Bureau wrote in its submission to the OECD Competition Committee Roundtable in 2013, this investigation of retail gas prices in Quebec has been one of the Bureau's most successful cases to date, and only came about as a result of proactive monitoring by Bureau employees. So it's a very big case. I mean, it's in terms of the number of individuals and companies involved in that case and so on. So I said, yes, I mean, but this is a pre-2010 conspiracy case, hence the undueness test must be applied. In Canada, until 2010, it's not illegal to try to fix prices. It's not illegal to meet in a room on the golf course and say we should fix prices and so on. And it's not illegal to do that. What is illegal is when your attempt becomes successful. So the notion is that if you cannot really apply your plot, let's say, to fix prices, if it doesn't work because there's always a deviation and so on, but you cannot agree and so on, then there's no case. I mean, you're not, you won't be prosecuted. It's legal to try to fix prices in a sense, okay? What is illegal is to be successful in doing it, okay? It has changed in 2010. Now this complot, what do you say complot? Yeah, I mean, is illegal per se, so you can be put in jail for trying to fix prices, but anyway. So, because it's a pre-2010 case, I mean, that case was from 2004 to 2006, basically. And the Bureau had people on wiretap, so you could listen, I mean, to how they would fix prices the next morning or in the afternoon. The first particular challenge here is to measure small and varying differences. Prices change during the day, but they are coordinated, okay? The second particular challenge is to assess the reference markets and time period. How long does this cartel been successful? And in fact, the above marker, which I'm going to, it's not the above, but below, was used not to discover the cartel itself, but to identify the proper reference and cartel period. Now, this is the price dynamics between retailers in Sherbrooke. So it goes from March 1993 to March 2006. So that's how it, and this is a standard deviation of prices charged by retailers at a given time in Sherbrooke. This is observed by a company called Kent Marketing, which goes around on one day. I mean, they go visit within an hour all the stations, and they just take down, I mean, what prices are being, and then you can compute the standard deviation, okay? And you can observe that here in the, basically in January 2000, okay, there is something going, not here, sorry. In January 2001, there is something going on. Here you have relatively high standard deviations and variance, and here it's very low and the variance is much lower. okay? Now let's look at the same graph, but in a reference market. This is a Montreal market, Montreal Center, it's part of Montreal. And here what we observe is that with the same period, if you start in January 2001 here, well, standard deviation tend to increase and variance also, not much, but at least, but standard deviation increases with the level of prices. And before it was relatively kind of stable with, I mean, a variance. So the two markets are moving in very different fashion. And this was an indication that intra broke here somewhere in January 2001, something happened, and possibly collusion started there. The accusation by the Justice Canada following the study by the Competition Bureau was that we had these people on wiretap starting in January 2004, and therefore we have a clear proof that in January 2004 to June 2006, people were colluding to fix prices because we had them on phones, you see. But in fact, it started earlier than that, according to this graph, okay? And these are significant changes. I mean, you run the test, I mean, it's all significant, okay? That there is a decrease in the standard deviation and variance, and then an increase here in standard deviation, although there's no increase in variance. I mean, it's not statistically significant. Now, the price dynamics indicates that the gasoline cartel existed as early as 2001, even if the accusation relates to the period to January 2004 to June 2006. The American Bar Association, their econometrics textbook, they have pick a quote there which says that when assessing damages using a before, during, or before, during, after approach, the beginning and the end point of the damages period must be identified. However, the beginning and the end of the damages period, alleged in many cases, may not accurately reflect the actual beginning and end of the alleged unlawful conduct. For example, in price-fixing class action cases, the plaintiff's attorneys often choose, well, that's not our point. Moreover, the beginning and end of the effects of the alleged unlawful conduct, maybe the unlawful conduct stopped at one point, but the effects are going to be felt on a longer period, may not coincide with the beginning and end of the conduct itself. The effects might occur later or earlier, end earlier, or last longer than the conduct. Experts should rely on the evidence developed in discovery, market facts, and the analysis of liability experts when determining the relevant starting and ending dates of this. Now, what happened there is that although the alleged accusation was for a cartel from 2004 to mid-2006, the data indicated that if we use the before 2004 data as being kind of a competitive period data, then we'll miss the boat because, I mean, the data seems to indicate at least that there was collusive activities starting in 2001. And indeed, in doing the study for the Bureau, I was involved in that study, we discarded 3 years of data before the starting collusion period in the accusation by the Justice Canada. We need to go back to, oh yes, well, an interesting point. It's that in a court case, one of the court cases which occurred there, one of the accused, under cross-examination by public prosecutors, said that indeed we started colluding in January 2001, which was a great, I don't know if I can write that in my CV, but it was a good quote, I mean, saying that, yes, I mean, and the judge in the decision writes, I mean, Professor Boyer was right in his testimony saying that collusion started in 2001. And therefore, we had to drop 3 years of data and go back to the period before that to get the kind of a period where we could reasonably think that there was competition really going on in the market. The estimated damages I give there from the conspiracy between 18.5 and 42 million, I mean, depending on which market you use as a reference market. But for the period 2004-2006, 6.7 million to 20.9 million for that period. If you take the longer period during which collusion existed, then you get between 20 million and 40 million dollars of overcharge to the population, let's say. Now that's what the Competition Bureau calls a proactive monitoring and competitive intelligence. I mean, looking at data on the markets and so on. Immunity and leniency program, I'm going to move to that now, just say a few words. I want to make sure that I have. The immunity program is the Bureau's single most powerful means of detecting, investigating, and prosecuting criminal activity under the Competition Act. The leniency, the difference between the two is the immunity is the first one to come in and declare the existence of the cartel. Leniency will be given to the second, third, and fourth who come in and cooperate with the Bureau. Okay? And most, if not all, cartels and anti-competitive practices cases involve an immunity applicant plus several leniency applicants now. It's the same in Europe, in the US, in Canada, and many other countries. I mean, Australia and so on. This immunity and leniency program becomes a very important challenges to these programs. The first one is within the firm, and we observe that, I mean, in real cases, it's difficult to uncover anti-competitive practices within the firm. Performance incentives given to regional managers or divisional managers and so on, and compliance programs with competition law and regulation, I mean, may come in a sense in contradiction. I mean, we want people to have high financial performance, but at the same time, we want them to comply with the competition law. But sometimes it's, if you want to improve your performance, you have to kind of get an agreement with your competitors, and which may not be known to the senior managers, vice presidents, president of the company. I mean, they may not know that one of their regional managers is involved in some kind of conspiracy case. Then the challenge is a significant discretion of antitrust authorities that if I go and confess that I was part of the cartel, I mean, am I going to get the leniency? If I don't get it, then I shouldn't go. I mean, but so this is also and I think that the antitrust authority is trying to be as predictable as possible as when and how will they grant immunity and leniency. Immunity will be 100% free of blame or fining, and leniency would be a reduction. I'm going to give an example. Then there would be private class actions to recover losses of damages together with the accessibility of leniency-related disclosure documents to private plaintiffs. If I go and I reveal, if I bring my books and say, look, I was part of this cartel, or I'm the first one to come in and say, look, I declare that we have a cartel with so, and here are my books, here are my, can this confession and the data that I'm going to provide be usable in a class action later on where people will try to get payment from me? And although the Bureau or the antitrust authority is going to give me full immunity, I may end up, having to pay millions of dollars in a class action suit. If, in particular, the class action can have access to all the things that I have, in the case of the gasoline gas market, a few weeks ago, a class action was solved, or the judge, granted the class action and granted $12 million in damages to the class members from those people participating in the class action, in the conspiracy here in the cartel. So it's a challenge for the application of immunity and leniency programs. So the right balance between public prosecution and private prosecution is a challenge. You have to consider both in a sense. And also one challenge is the sophisticated strategies of cartelists. Firms know now that one of their cartelists, one of their friend, may go to the antitrust authority and declare the existence of the cartel. And this is going to be part of the of the strategies to form and maintain a cartel. I mean, it's going to be endogenously taken into account, and there will be modification in the strategies. I have maybe a few minutes to talk about the Office of Fair Trading handling of a case, a very nice, interesting, particular case of a cartel. It's between British Airways and Virgin Atlantic Airways, who colluded on fixing the passenger fuel surcharge between August 2004 and January 2006. On March 10, 2006, Virgin Atlantic filed for immunity, and it was granted in full in December 2008. It took basically a year and a half before there was an agreement with the OFT for full immunity, but they got it, okay? Then the OFT on June 13 raided British Airways, and British Airways filed for leniency, saying, I'm going to cooperate. Yes, we were in this because Virgin Atlantic had already declared and brought documents showing that they were, in fact, fixing the fuel surcharge together. And it was granted in July, and in April 2010, they finally settled for a 25% reduction in the fine that British Airways will have to pay. And the original penalty of 121 million pounds was reduced to 58 million pounds in 2012 because of different factors, including leniency. Now, the question here is, why would two firms collude on a cost which represents between 7 and 10% of the price of the ticket, but they're not colluding on the prices, on the price of the ticket, on the selling price of the ticket. There's no agreement on number of seats, of passengers, or whatever. I mean, there's no other part of this collusion except fixing the price for the passenger fuel surcharge, which represent, let's say, 10% of the end price. Why would two firms do that? And so you need kind of a theory of this collusion. And the relevant market here is, in fact, the British travelers and British organizations that prefer to fly on national airlines like British Airways and Virgin Atlantic rather than on competitive competitors airline like Air Canada or Delta or other. But now, the problem is that when they were announcing a change in the fuel surcharge started in 2004. When they were announcing that, it would be covered by the British press, you see, and impacted negatively the image of the airline which was proposing it. At least that was what the airlines were claiming. And therefore, they wanted these two airlines only, not the other ones that are flying between London and different cities in the world. But these two airlines wanted to avoid the bad press when they were changing the price of the passenger fuel surcharge. And they wanted to announce it on the same day and by the same amount, so that for the press would not react saying that, yeah, I mean, it's a worldwide situation and our national carriers are caught in this competition and so on. And this would prevent, I mean, the bad press and would maintain their market power, in quotation mark, on that specific market of the British nationals preferring, individuals and organizations preferring to travel on national airlines, okay? It was strong enough for them to engage in a collusion at that point, and they were fine. I mean, the Virgin Atlantic was. The impact, what is the relevant period if you want to determine the impact? Remember the American Bar Association quote that I gave previously. Is it the August 2004 to February 2006 period, which is in March 2006, Virgin Atlantic declared the cartel to the antitrust authorities in England. But British Airways is unaware of that. They will learn in June. So maybe we should go to May 2006 because British Airways doesn't know that, in fact, it is Virgin Atlantic is kind of talking to the antitrust authorities. Maybe it's going to be, the effect will extend beyond even the moment at which British Airways revealed that they have been part of this conspiracy, and they will collaborate with the, In fact, the data seems to indicate that prices were not affected by this movement, in fact. And the prices have been maintained above competitive levels for a certain period of time after both companies had declared and confessed to be part of that conspiracy. Is that possible? That in fact, the airlines had already internalized this possibility that there will be a search for immunity and leniency by saying that since these guys at the OFT are going to use the prices after we have confessed and so on to impose fines on us, the best thing is that we maintain those prices for at least a few months after that, so that when they will take those prices as competitive, they will find that there's been no effect to the conspiracy. This is, I'm not inventing things. We have cases of this type, particularly in the cement industry in Germany. It's well documented. That part of the agreement, the collusive agreement, was that if we're caught, we maintain the prices. We're not going to talk to each other anymore, but we maintain prices for 6 months. So that these economists that are going to make the market study and so on, they would be fooled by our strategy. Was it part here? Was the immunity and leniency application planned by Virgin Atlantic and British Airways because they were feeling that they would be discovered soon, and it's better to go forward and get a reduction in the fine that we will get in any case? I don't know, but these are interesting questions. I'm moving now to the other point about challenging pitfalls and cartel finding. And here I'm interested mainly in overcharges and the dynamics of cartel stability. And these are the 2 points I'm going to talk about. The overcharges. What is a typical overcharge of a cartel? What can we have a kind of a rough figure? And then what about the proper dynamics of the cartel compared with the static approach to crime deterrence economics? You can have a static, the Becker-Landais theory. You take the estimated, the cartel or the criminal are going to engage in a crime. If the expected gain divided by the probability of being caught is larger than the cost of forming the cartel, okay? I'm getting mixed. If the expected benefits are larger than the expected fine divided by the probability that you will be caught, you see. And that's the Becker-Landais. Now, in a dynamic context, we'll see that it's quite different. It doesn't work exactly like that. And I'm going to skip because of time. Those quotes, but challenges to this. The legal principle of proportionality of the sentence to the harm caused versus the economic theory of crime. Dividing the expected benefits or the realized benefit of a crime by the probability that the person would have been caught is something that judges do not buy because of the fact that there's this principle of proportionality that is very important. There might be some aggravating factors and alleviating factors, but fundamentally, people should be charged for the crime they have committed. But if the probability of catching a thief is 10%, someone who has stolen $1,000 should be fined $10,000 according to Becker-Landais. But courts are not going to go that route. So, the objective I'm pursuing now in this section is characterizing the proper level of fines and penalties. So I want to estimate the probability of discovery and conviction because the efficiency of the court system avoiding type 1 and type 2 errors has impact on incentives to form and or deviate from a cartel. I'm not going to cover that question. What I want to look at is estimating the level of overcharges, damages, and the proper dynamics of cartel formation and stability. And we will see that properly doing that will have a significant impact on that. John Connor has developed a database of cartels that contains some 1,119 usable cartels, episode studies and analysis of cartels over time and regions. John Connor has been very influential in Europe, in Canada, and in the US as to the, and his statements repeated again and again and again is that fines are much too low to be deterrent. So I asked him, would you provide me with your data set so that I can run some, and he accepted. I mean, he sent me all the data, and we started with Rashidi Kuchoni working on that, and this was published in the Review of Industrial Organization in 2015. We discovered that there are problems with the quality of the data, which are obtained from different methodologies, sources, and contexts rather than from direct observations. Okay? The possibility of model error, estimation error, endogeneity biases, and publication bias might create problems with the data. The data contains a number of relatively small overcharge estimates, called overcharge estimates because all the reports are about estimates of overcharge of a given cartel somewhere at a given time, and a small number of large overcharge estimates. So this is the table of, here in the table, the only number that, if we look at the successful cartels where the overcharge was greater than 0, the average overcharge was 49%. This represented 93% of the cartels. You have 7% of the cartels, 7.3% of the cartels that had an overcharge of 0, basically. So it was, or maybe sometime a negative overcharge. I mean, they tried to form a cartel and they ended up fighting with each other and lowering prices. But this is not published. I mean, you would have problems publishing a paper where you're looking at a cartel and you end up saying that prices went down, a price-fixing cartel. So it's a publication bias. We know all about that. All of our major papers were not published because of that. Overcharge estimates are explained by the following variables. Those logically and directly related to overcharges, what I call the Y variables here, duration, scope, bid rigging or not, geography, region, period, because of different antitrust laws and so on. Found or pleaded guilty, which is an endogenous variable, we have to take that into account. And those that should not be related to overcharge estimates, what we call the bias capturing Z variables, estimation method, and publication media. That shouldn't be related to the overcharge estimates. I mean, it's, so we run a meta-analysis of this, and we derive bias-corrected overcharge estimates, corrected for the biases I mentioned before, problems in the data. I mean, we could find out, in fact, some of the data couldn't be used. Properly taking into account the statistically significant effects of the two bias capturing influence Z variables, if they are, in fact. So we'll correct because of the fact that it seems there has been publication bias and estimation method biases in the data, and implementing a proper truncation of the data to improve reliability of estimates. I'm not going to, we use a methodology called the Kullback-Leibler divergence from 1951 to compare two distributions, one including the bias capturing variables and the other one not, and looking at the difference in the distribution. We run, I don't know, 50 or 60 probit models, I mean, to estimate this difference. And we find that here at about 65%, whoops, there's something going on. I mean, with cartels that have overcharge estimates larger than 65, seems to have significant problems because of the fact that these Z variables become very important. Now, we run multiple tests. I mean, we spend 7 or 8 pages of different tests in the paper I'm not going to talk about to show that, in fact, the cutting point is going to be at about 49%. So the data for the 0 to 49%, these two, the Z variables have no impact. But for cartels with overcharge estimate above that, the Z variable becomes significant. And there were problems with the estimates of some of the probit models that we had to correct and so on. But we are going to create a truncation, an artificial truncation of the data to improve reliability of estimates. We're going to consider that it's as if these were not observable. We know they're there, but we cannot observe them, in a sense, the proper overcharge estimate. We use a Heckman methodology to take that into account, and then we bring back those cartels within the study, bring the zero also, and get a correction. The results of this is that considering the pre-1973 and post-1973 cartels in the database of John Connor, the reason of 1973 is that 1973-74 was an important date, where in the US, antitrust authorities became much more aggressive towards cartel than before. For domestic cartels, domestic wherever they are, the raw overcharge estimates in the table I gave you before are 35% and 33% for the pre-73, post-73. The bias-corrected overcharge estimates that we obtain are 13 and 13. For international cartels, raw overcharge estimates 89-44, bias-corrected 15-19. And for all cartels, raw overcharge was 62-39, bias-corrected overcharge estimates that we obtained 14-16. So looking at our results, 13-13, 15-19, 14-16, lead us to say that, in a sense, a cartel is a cartel is a cartel, okay? In the sense that, they are all kind of, whatever their period, where their region, and so on, they kind of, on average, raise prices by about 15%. Which is much lower than what we had before, the 49%. And this will lead us to, so keep in mind this 15%. This is a typical overcharge of a cartel all over the world and over time, over industries. It's always around 15%. It's close to that, at least. Then we worked on the dynamics of cartel formation and stability, and we'll show a striking difference between a static and a dynamic approach to those. I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to go a little bit quickly there, but it's all, for those of you who want to see more, I'm going to... In a dynamic context, we take into account the fact that a firm reassesses continuously its decision to continue with the cartel or deviate from it. Continuously. Firms are always, wondering if we should continue or not. We should go for immunity or not. Or simply walk out of the cartel. The decision is not a one-time decision. It is, as in a static context. It's going to be done, over time. Maybe in the last 2 years we kept on, but now this year we want to walk out. A deterrent fine is one that favors deviation as the firm reassesses its strategy. The parameters of interest will be those profits, the first pie there is the profit if there's no cartel activity, and so the but-for price. It could be a competitive price, it could be an oligopolistic price. PM is a cartel price. PD is a deviation, not price, profit. PD is the deviation profit. If I deviate, this is the profit I'm going to realize. In general, it's going to be higher than the cartel profit during the period before the other guys react, of course. And then I have alpha, which is the probability of being discovered by the antitrust authorities, and delta is the discount factor. And therefore, you get a cartel overcharge, a but-for price, and the elasticity of demand are going to come in, and so on. There are challenges in working out, the details of the model, a dynamic model. The cartel overcharged a but-for price, which may not be a competitive price. There might be some coordinated effect already going on in the market before a formal cartel is established. Elasticity of demand are not independent. They're all determined. You cannot simply vary one of those factors or parameters. Challenges, proxy methods must be handled with care, factors underlying the but-for price or environment. These are conditions for tacit collusion, coordinated conduct. Maybe there existed tacit collusion before you formed the cartel, and therefore the cartel effect is going to be relatively small, although the anti-competitive practices may be very significant. In a fully dynamic context with endogenous capacity, competition in capacities, expansion and realistic stylized industry characteristics like no commitment besides the reversibility of investments, no order of move, lumpy investments, we showed that typically in the development of an industry there are episodes of tacit collusion, an episode of harsh competition, and then an episode of tacit collusion followed by as the industry develops and capacity increases. In particular, I take the fourth element, that the number of probability of tacit collusion episodes increases with demand growth and volatility, but decreases with the firm's cost of capital. These are elements you have to take into account to make sure that the fine benchmark in a dynamic context, I'm going to get to the I'm not going to describe this, but this is to convince you that the value of the firm in the cartel is given by this: the profit, the probability of being discovered, I pay a fine, and then after that, we're not colluding anymore, and therefore for the rest of times. So this is the discounted value of the firm after being discovered, plus the probability of not being discovered and keeping on with the cartel. This is given by this dynamic programming methodology, and then we get that under some conditions, the latter fine, which I call the dynamic fine, will go to delta pi over alpha. Delta pi is the difference in profit if I remain in the cartel or if I quit. Okay, if the fine is above that level, which is a one-period kind of criterion, the cartel is going to be unstable. Okay, and here I get that the fine DF is obtained under the most demanding assumptions. The deviation profit is not much more than the cartel profit, so it's very close. The discount factor is close to 1, so I value the future a lot, and therefore the profit of the cartel are very, very valued to me. If I discount the future by 50%, of course, the fact that we can next period realize a profit if we remain in the cartel is a low value today in discounted terms. But this means that the discount rate is small, or the discount factor is equal to 1. Quick detection of deviation, no pardon among firms, no retroactive discovery, no leniency. Under those assumptions, the deterrent fine is delta pi over alpha. It's very different from the fines that you would get under a static approach. There are two fines in a static approach. This one here, this is a function of the number of years of the cartel, and this is a fine that you have to, it's normalized to 1 for the dynamic deterrent fine, which is the fine that we have developed here, which is independent of the number of years, because all you want to do is make the cartel unstable. We want the firm to deviate today, or next year, or the year after. But it doesn't matter if you've been around if the cartel has been around for 5 years, you see. And this is a fine that has been developed by two authors. One of the co-author is the Vice President Chief Economist of the French Antitrust Authority. And we claim that his results are unreliable. So, and this will have an impact when we are going to compare if fines are properly deterrent or not. So remember that we are going to compare a deterrent fine, which is constant here, with this fine here, okay? And of course, what we're going to get is we're going to run a study. We collected in Europe. Why Europe? Because in Europe, there's no jail terms. Here, the problem is that if a cartel, I mean, there are jail terms imposed, what's the value of that in terms of how to compare that with fines? In Europe, there's only fines. So we're going to, we developed a database where 235 firms, 138, we could have enough data to compute, I mean, what would be the proper fine. And then, I mean, the conclusion is here of this study, here, that comparing the level of the fines imposed in recent years by the European Commission to the proposed dynamic deterrent fine benchmark, we can conclude that on average, the level of fines has been adequate for deterrence, which is, of course, I mean, very, very different from what John Connor and Emmanuel Combe, this guy at the French Antitrust Authority, have been claiming on all, again, and again, that fines are much too low to be deterrent. And we claim that there are two problems with that. First, overestimation of the overcharge estimates. Second, the improperly defined dynamics of cartel stability. So if you want to get more details, but this is really a striking kind of result because it created all kinds of fuss, I mean, or buzz, I should say, not buzz, in particularly in Europe because, I mean, I'm going to switch this about collaboration between competitors. The law was changed in Canada in 2010. This was my second team to allow collaboration between competitors without the competitors to be sued for cartel activities. Some collaboration is in fact pro-competitive and some may not be. Before 2010, there was a high probability that if you collaborate with your competitors, you'll be sued for collusion. Now, the Competition Bureau uses a dual track. We look at the efficiency of proper collaboration in terms of innovation, setting standards, and so on, where collaboration may be very efficient in promoting competition and efficiency without being sued for cartel activities. So and now cartel activities, in particular price fixing activities, are illegal per se. So you don't have to show that they have an impact. If you have been colluding, then you'll be sued for cartel activity. I had all kinds of nice things to say about the Canadian guidelines for collaboration, but you could read the paper too. 3, 4th, and 5th point. Third was convincing people that competition is good. How are we going to do that? Competition in the public sector and pro-efficiency and pro-competition policies. So 11:30. So I'll take maybe 10 minutes to. I think that, and this was mentioned in some of the presentations during this conference. How do you convince people that competition is good? How do you convince people that you may have to change your employment, you may have to change to switch job, you may have to move into another field or move out of this city because your job is going to disappear, okay? This is what I cover here. What I say that we need to develop efficient mechanisms and institutions for better adaptation to change by both individuals and firms and organizations. Lifelong learning colleges and universities, which would develop prevention and intervention. Supply management in Canada, softwood lumber are nice cases of those. Are we prepared for those? Can we, rather than trying to defend, I mean, to delimit those industries and this the way we manage those sectors. Are we preparing people to the eventuality, the disappearance of the U.S. softwood lumber, at least a reduction, significant reduction of the capacity to, and the abandonment of supply management? Promote direct, transparent, favor moderate. Okay. Competition in the public sector, I want to say a few words about that. So I want to talk about education. Remember that we said before that competition is key to well-being, key to efficiency, and so on. If that is the case, then there should be competition in the public sector. So I'm going to say a few words about that. In particular, education and healthcare. I recall the Fab4 factors of growth: human capital, invention, innovations, incentives, and efficient coordination and allocation mechanisms, markets, basically. And Nancy Wheeler insisted on the importance of having proper pricing of critical land and of water and resources and so on, to make sure that we manage, and the environment in particular, we manage our economy properly. Competition is key, so I recall the key policies here would require expanding the role of competition policy authorities and the role of competition in public policy. Clearly define the core competencies of the governmental and competitive sector. I don't have time to develop all that, but promote open and transparent competitive mechanisms in the attribution of contracts for the production, distribution, delivery of public and social goods and services. I want to get to healthcare, so education is kind of similar. The current system, we have a co-management model where politicians, government officials, and healthcare workers, all groups, from doctors to janitors, come before the interests of patients and citizens in a non-competitive framework. The needed system is a more efficient division of responsibilities between government and competitive sectors. Second, a systematic recourse to competitive processes and prices in allocating incentive public contracts to healthcare supplying businesses. And third, a competition authority is responsible to ensure proper collaboration, but the absence of naked or implicit cartels in the field. I'm not talking here in health sector of collusion between big pharmaceuticals. I'm talking about collusion between hospitals, okay? Now, can we introduce competition in the healthcare sector in a publicly funded sector? The answer is yes. We have to make a difference between the funding of the system and who provides the services to the population, under what kind of contracts. And I say that if competition is key to well-being, then it must be the case in healthcare, that the government is going to keep financing publicly, having a zero price possibly for access, but the providers of the services will be private organizations under contract and competing with each other for customers, which means patients and citizens. Okay. Even if it's all free access, open access, and so on to the healthcare sector. Same thing for education. These are data that may not be known very well, but France, in the OECD world, France is always ranked among the top one, many years, the first, second country where the healthcare system is considered the most efficient. And the evaluation by the citizens of the country is also highly ranked, compared with Canada, for instance, which comes much lower in the ranking. In France, and here I'm going to talk about private for-profit hospitals. In France, you can go get a surgery, deliver a baby in a private for-profit hospital, buy stocks of the hospital on the stock exchange, and go and be treated in the hospital in question. Okay? There are private for-profit hospitals. 39% of hospital establishments, meaning that they have beds where you can spend 1, 2, 3 nights. 39% of establishments are private for-profit hospitals in France. 24% of beds are in private for-profit hospitals. In Germany, the numbers are 33% of establishments, 17% of beds. In the US, 18% of establishments, 15% of beds. The private for-profit hospital system is much more important in France and Germany than it is in the US. Because in the US, most of the hospitals are under not-for-profit organizations, charitable organizations, foundations, or things like that, but not for profit. But the payment system is very different. In France and Germany, like in Canada, the government insures people who may need health care, but the providers of the service are, in a significant portion of the hospital, private for-profit hospitals. In France, private for-profit hospitals represent 20% of establishments with emergency rooms. Okay. They're not only rooms for patients that are come for surgery, but emergency rooms. 20% of the hospitals are private for-profit. They perform 55% of surgeries, 70% of ambulatory intervention, 50% of cancer treatments, 30% of birth deliveries, 25% of cardiac intervention, 20% of psychiatric and hospital treatment outside the university hospital centers. It's a very, very significant sector of the French, and the French are ranked, again, in the OECD as the best. There's no waiting lines in the French hospital system, in the emergency rooms, okay? At least maybe an hour, not 25 hours. It's in some of the... In France today, private for-profit hospitals deliver a public service mission and are almost 100% integrated with the public healthcare insurance system. If I go again and have a surgery in a private for-profit hospital, the healthcare authorities, public healthcare authorities, are going to pay the same price that they are paying to a public hospital for the service you're going to get from the hospital. So they are private for profit, but they're all integrated in the healthcare insurance system, the public healthcare insurance system. It's important. That's very important. This is very different from the US, okay? Although in the US there is also a significant insurance system, but still, I mean, here we're not, it's only the supply side that is different, that is where they compete with public hospitals for patients. You have free choice as a citizen. You may decide to go to the private for-profit hospital or go to a public hospital to get the treatment. It's complete freedom. They are particularly present in disadvantaged neighborhoods. This is another, here you read in the press, sometimes people intervening saying that private for-profit hospitals will be for the rich. In France, it's for the poor, basically. Because why? Because the public hospitals are located in key places in Paris, nice neighborhoods, nice places, close to a subway and so on. But the fringe was badly deserved, and that's where the private for-profit hospitals went. I visited some of them, and in difficult neighborhoods, you find private for-profit hospitals. They serve 50% of CMU patients. CMU are the lower, these are the patients. In France, you have a ticket modérateur, that you go to a doctor, you have to pay 25 euros. You go to a hospital, you pay for the room. You may be reimbursed for the part that is not paid by the public healthcare system. So you have to pay. There is a payment, out-of-pocket payment, which will be reimbursed if you have a private insurance system. But it's not very important, but still, 25 euros to see a doctor is something. But a certain number of patients, those that are the least advantaged in the population, are covered 100% by the public system. These are CMU patients. Okay, so these are the poor French people that benefit from a complete coverage, 100%. They won't have to pay out of pocket to doctors or hospitals if they are treated. 50% of them are treated in private for-profit hospitals. The reason is that in the neighborhood, I mean, that's what they have access to, and the private for-profit hospital know that this is a source of revenue for them, rather than simply a source of cost. Okay, that's an important aspect to keep in mind also. And then I'm going to Michi. 5 minutes. Let me talk about, yesterday I talked in a session on competition policy. I talked about avoidable costs versus full cost sharing in terms of developing pro-efficiency and pro-competition policies. Avoidable costs here is that you would be charged for predatory pricing if you're selling at a price lower than the avoidable costs, what you would save if you were not providing that service or that product to the customer. For instance, in the airline industry, which has been, a case here, Air Canada was accused in the early 2000s of selling tickets below their costs on certain lines to evict competitors. And once the competitor has left, then they would raise the price, limit supply and raise the price, and recoup their investment, in a sense, in evicting the competitor. It's grossly representing what they were accused of. And now, what's the avoidable cost? I mean, what would you save if you're not doing the Montreal Antigonish link, let's say? You'd save the fuel. And I remember an interview with the president of Air Canada in the Globe and Mail saying that basically I would save the fuel. The plane I have to keep. My personnel, it's all under labor contract, and I cannot save anything on them. So even if I keep them, doing nothing, I have to pay them, so it's not an avoidable cost. And therefore, the fuel. And if I charge more than the fuel cost, then of course if I charge just a little bit more, I'm going to evict all competitors, okay? So what is the proper concept of avoidable cost? The competition authorities have developed criteria for that, and there have been court cases and so on, but it's still based on the notion of incremental, avoidable, marginal costs, or different terms. You would add some fixed costs that are related really to the link that in the airline industry that we are considering, but none of the fixed cost or overhead costs or system costs will be considered, okay? What I'm saying is that this is not the proper rule. The proper rule should be full cost sharing. Everybody has to pay a share, and develop the idea that in a cooperative game context, where consumers of Air Canada services are all around the table and say we have to share the costs of the company. To provide all these services, well, they have to share all the costs, not only the avoidable costs, the marginal costs, the variable costs, the fixed product-related costs, but the fixed costs, overhead costs, and everything. And that's how you would promote competition and efficiency in the long run, not in the short run. In the short run, it would be more efficient to have a monopolist airline providing the service for everyone, because they would save on economies of scope, scale and network and so on. But over the medium term, you get a monopoly, basically, and then you become less and less efficient. Air Canada was saying that we don't save much cost. When they went bankrupt in the early 2000s, they restructured and eliminated all kinds of costs. Same thing for the telecom services. I remember all these sessions before the CRTC about Bell Canada rates. Bell Canada was coming with all the tons of documents and data saying that our costs are so much, and therefore we need a rate of return reasonable, 12%, 11%, and so on. And therefore we need an increase of 2% of our rates, or 3%. Then at one time we said, look, we stopped this. We opened the field to competition, and prices went down, the next day almost. And I remember talking with executives at Bell Canada. At that time, Bell Canada was forced to maintain its prices for something like 6 months before reducing prices to allow competitors to try to come in, you see. So if I have a price, if someone decides to come in for one of my service, I cannot react by lowering my price. I have to maintain it for 6 months. And there were some newcomers saying that we are going to reduce prices for long-distance calls in particular by 50%. And people at Bell Canada were telling me that this is a scandal. This is scandalous because we could reduce it by 90% if we were allowed to do it, you see. So, and then, but before the advance of competition. The public grants, loans, financial guarantees want to favor competition in public policy now. We're not so much in competition policy field. The competitive market conditions for public financial support, so when the government invests in General Motors at the time, I mean, in 2009, 2008 and 9, when it invests in Bombardier and so on, these are big cases that, and all the other ones. I mean, there's a fundamental fallacy, it's called the lower cost of public funds or public borrowing, that it's good for the government to invest, we're going to get a return, and since anyway our debt, we can finance it on the market at a low price, at a low interest rate. This is a false statement. The reason why the government is getting this low rate is that the lender has no risk because of the government can always raise taxes to pay lenders, reimburse lenders, and pay interest on the loan. And therefore, for the lenders, lending to the government is a no-risk strategy. Who bears the risk? The taxpayers, who will eventually have to foot the bill if a bad investment has been made. And therefore, I'm claiming that there's no difference between the cost of public capital and the cost of private capital. And therefore, this idea that the government should invest in Bombardier because the debt can be financed at 2%, while the expected return is 4%. Well, the cost is not 2%. The cost, you have to take into account the financial option that taxpayers gave to the government, that the government would be able to come and say, look, I have to get money from your bank account because of the bad deal I made a few years ago with this firm. And if you take that into account, you get exactly the same cost. Or if you give a large company, private company, the possibility to raise taxes, if some of its investment run into trouble, it will be financed at the same rate as the government, or almost. Okay? So, and then the other one is the policy of auctioning financial support actions and programs. The government of Quebec invested $1.3 billion in Bombardier. It should have gone on the market and say, we want to sell that contract to whoever wants to take it. Take the responsibilities that we've committed to do this, and this is how we're going to be repaid, and this is Bombardier and so on. This is a very nice contract. It has 500 pages, but we will organize an auction, worldwide auction. You get a financial syndicate who is really going to say, look, we're going to buy, we're going to take it. We'll respect all the commitments, and we'll get the money out of Bombardier when it comes according to the terms of the contract, but we will charge you $100 million. And the government, if that's the best offer, the government put $100 million of spending in its books and give the contract away. Okay? That would be the proper way to do this, we would know what's the cost of those financial support of all kinds to the conclude 5 sets of challenges and pitfalls I developed here or tried to develop. Competition is key. Competition Bureau, this should be written in every firm, every offices. Competition is key. Discovery and finding of cartels, collaboration is good. I didn't talk much about that, but convincing people that competition is good, how do you do that? You have to give them the possibility to adapt. You have to give them the instruments to do it. Competition in public policy regarding education, healthcare, and so on, if competition is good for supplying food to the people, it should be good also to provide healthcare services to the people. And then predatory pricing and public financing intervention. Thank you very much.